Yeah, well, we've just, we're in a pretty tricky situation with live music at the moment. We've got all of the things that we see across the economy generally, rising costs of things like insurance, electricity. For venues, that's been particularly tricky. Insurance costs have gone up, 300-400%. And energy costs, the cost of security. And then on top of that, you've got, fans who are having trouble with cost of living, really being very careful about how they spend their money. So unfortunately, we've seen festivals not go ahead. And in the venues that we mostly represent, the smaller grassroots side of the business, it really is quite difficult for them to stay open. And we've seen a range of closures, unfortunately, as a result of all of that.
Now, there's obviously a lot of moving parts here, but let's focus on some of the major sticking points. You mentioned cost of living, which affects all corners of the industry, all corners of life. Earlier this year, the federal budget earmarked nearly $9 million for music venues and festivals through the Revive Live program. Is that enough?
I think when you look at spending in other areas of the economy and you weight it out, it really, we think, is not enough. We're very grateful that Tony Burke and the Australian government have earmarked that money, but we really think if you consider spending in other categories like sport and other forms of lifestyle and entertainment, spending in the music sector is really fairly small. So there's a quantum issue. We also advocate, though, for a more sort of strategic investment in the industry. Quite often we see funding go to one aspect of the sector alone, rather than trying to support it in a more integrated fashion. So, for example, just spending on venues or just spending on artists themselves. And so we think that it needs to be a more strategic approach so that we can support a whole ecosystem approach to live music.
Well, let's look at audiences for a moment. The impact of the pandemic is still being felt all over. How has the behaviour of music fans changed in recent years?
Well, I think people are just more cautious. They're more cautious about where they're spending their money. We see in festivals people holding off on buying tickets until later in the piece. We see people going out to venues and being careful about how much they spend. And we're also seeing it's not like people don't like music anymore. We've seen large tours, international acts come into Australia and set records in terms of audience numbers and ticket sales. But that's having an impact on the local economy as well. So people are saving their money for some of these larger tours, which has an impact on their spending behaviour in the smaller side of town.
Now, you mentioned venues before. You mentioned that they're dealing with higher insurance premiums, higher rents, local government requirements, noise and things like that. What can be done there to ease some of that burden? You mentioned a more holistic approach there.
Yeah, well, we think that through this period, it's going to be very difficult for venues to survive without some kind of funding assistance. The UK government has just approved a trial of an initiative that we think the Australian government should consider as well, which is a venue arena ticket levy, which is for shows that are in 5,000 pax and greater arenas, where $1 or over there £1 is added to the production costs of each of those shows, and it's shared by the artist, the promoter, the venue, and the fan. That dollar then goes into a trust, and that trust distributes the funds to grassroots music venues who really need this sort of scaffolding, this support through what we know is an economy that is really struggling in these sort of smaller business end of things. So we think the Australian government should consider something like that. We're in discussions with promoters, with venues, and there's broad support for an initiative like that. But really, it is that they need some kind of help to get through a period that is really quite difficult. Now, the economy will turn. We think that things will swing back around as they always do, but we can't have these smaller grassroots venues fall out of the market. That would be terrible for the future of Australian live music.
Let's move on to artists. The way that they're discovered these days is obviously drastically different to what it was years ago, but their pay packets don't seem to have changed much over time. Why is that?
Well, I think if you talk to any venue, any artist, who's just even starting to make it, so just starting to get a following, the cost of touring up and down, even just the eastern seaboard, let alone traveling into regional markets, it's really very expensive. So all of those costs are happening at a touring level as well, which is still a major part of breaking a new artist in Australia and internationally. And so that's another initiative that we've put forward to government, that these tours can only happen, that these artists can only take, a risk on these tours if we can get some kind of backing behind them. Now, we're not saying, fund the whole tour. We're saying a stimulus package to help support and underwrite some of the risks that are associated with, with funding these tours into particularly regional markets.
What about music production as a whole? Technology has made accessing music and recording music a lot easier in so many ways. Has that been a help or a hindrance to the industry?
Well, I think it's quite a difficult one, that one. I mean, it means that anyone can get a song really quite easily up onto Spotify. If you can get a great audience behind you through socials, then you can really, get a great following, and that can be in some ways quite easy. But because it's so easy, there's so much competition now in the space, and it does make it quite hard for artists to really break through, which is why really, there is no substitute really for people going along to have that live music connection in a venue. But, the pay packets of artists really hasn't changed. And many times they're travelling on tours, making almost nothing. I mean, a lot of these smaller tours for emerging artists, they're paying. They're actually coming home broke, having made no money at all. It's not a sob story. This is just the reality of the way, the market works. But, if we have an artist go on to do great things, an example like Royal Otis, they're selling out 2,000 capacity shows throughout the US at the moment. Only 8 months ago, they were at the Lansdowne, 350 people. That leap going from those smaller venues to large tours, we need to have a really good program to help support emerging artists take on good tours across the country.
Phil, we appreciate you taking the time to speak to us tonight. I understand you're off to take part in a live performance yourself straight after this. For any music fans who are watching tonight, what can they do differently from here on to help keep live music going in Australia?
Well, number one, find that local music venue near you and go and support it. Be active yourself. Continue to focus on your craft and hone your skills. But really, we do need a community that supports each other and gets around each other when, we're struggling through what are some pretty difficult times.
Phil Brown from the Australian Live Music Business Council joining us there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Manny.